that's CCDC class.
Yeah, we gotta convince them.
Yeah, well, I'm on the external advisory board. I've mentioned it 2 or 3 times before, but they don't. Yeah. Yeah, make sure when we have our annual meeting this year, and you guys come in, meet with us outside industry people, that you say, we ought to have a capstone class for cybersecurity, and it should reflect exactly what they do in the CCDC competition, which is what UCF does, and that's how they win every year. That and having professionals. They used to check that stuff a lot more closely. Like, for example, Zan, when he was the president here, he was full-time, like, paid sysadmin for they wouldn't let him play.
They still check full-time status?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a surprise that they have professionals that will come back to school and do it full-time.
Yeah,
being a professional.
that's strange to me.
I guess they want their IT degree or whatever.
I guess if you're working on your master's degree, maybe you can be considered full-time graduate student, even though you have a full-time job. I don't know.
We are streaming, ready to go.
All right.
People are coming in from the RQ thing, so they're going to be a little.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
What's RQ thing?
Like Quest.
I know, what thing?
They're doing a labs, the RQ labs that will lead to internships.
Okay.
And, half of Whiteheaders are in that program, so
Interesting.
it should be coming in any second. Now I'm going to double check the audio outside, or a little bit further away.
What are you guys using for sim in there? What sim are you using in the RQ labs? So ELK, basically, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back. I'm Jeremy Rasmussen. I'm CTO and partner at Avocode. We're in a building downtown on Harbor Island, 1 floor below ReliaQuest. Like I said, keep an eye on those guys. We like to troll them in the elevator. Oh man, we just had a takeaway from ReliaQuest today. I mean, they have a 10-year head start on us, so God bless them. You know, they're doing great. They've got a lot of external funding, but I do feel like at some point we're going to pass them because we don't just do security monitoring. We do holistic programs. We do the whole thing. Everything we do is aligned with the Cybersecurity Best Practices Framework. We do pen testing, we do training, we do policy and procedure support, and we do security operations. So right now our customers are, mid-market, I would say, $100 million up to $1 billion, whereas they're more targeting like Fortune 500, type, customers, which is fine. And I have nothing bad to say about ReliaQuest. They do a good job. I just think we're going to be, we're eventually going to surpass those guys. So, also my fun side job has been teaching at USF for 20 years. I'm not teaching anything this semester, but kind of the way it started was I was just looking for some advanced coursework in cryptography and network security as a grad student, and I was asking them, hey, do you got anything? And they're like, no, we don't have anything. This is about 20 years ago. That's 1999, 2000. And I just got my CISSP credential, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but I had all my study materials from that. Plus, we had an in-house crypto class. I was working at a company pretty much across the street from here called Cypress Electronics. We made crypto boxes for 3-letter acronym agencies in the government. And so we had this guy, Dr. Dave Davis, who was an adjunct faculty member at USF. He did an in-house crypto class for us. So I asked him, hey, Dr. Dave, can I take your notes? I'll take my sysub stuff. And I think it was Larry Hall and Dr. Labrador and Dr. Christensen were like, hey, can you put together, an undergraduate class, Intro to Computer Security? So I did, and that was like the very first security class. Well, now, of course, they have a bachelor's program, they got a master's program, they got tenure track people. I remember when it was like 2, Dr. Ligotti, I think, and maybe Dr. Labrador, who I just learned passed away last year. I didn't even know that. Miguel Labrador. Did you guys ever have him for any
I was
classes?
going to take Networks 2 with him the last year that he offered it, and then the class was canceled.
Oh, man. So I guess he ran into some health issues or whatever. Great guy. Worked on some projects with him. Anyways, I remember when those guys were hired as the first 2 tenure-track faculty in cybersecurity for USF. So before that, it was just me teaching ethical hacking, mobile and wireless security, digital forensics, and some other classes. So I taught here, and I also taught in the Sarasota Manatee online. I like their program because it's all online. So I'm a pretty busy person, so I could just teach it from wherever. And eventually, I just recorded all my videos and put it, all my content online and had it all automated. So it was nice. I was ahead of the game before COVID hit. Now you guys have learned about remote teaching and everything. But our company, like I said, we're kind of unique in that we will do a fully managed cybersecurity program, which a lot of, only the biggest companies out there will probably do. Deloitte, E&Y, Accenture, right? And you're going to be paying probably 10 times what they, what we would charge. So that's our whole goal is, help out the small to mid-sized enterprise companies. We'll probably have a big announcement coming up pretty soon too, where it's going to, I can't say any details about it, but we're going to have an acquisition that's going to greatly increase our size and scope of what we do. All right, so here's what we talk about. Post-COVID environment and zero trust. What does that mean? What is trusted software or not trusted software? How does what's the most popular vector for ransomware? I'm going to highlight some kind of emerging threats around SSL VPN, 5G, machine learning, and then what can we do about all that stuff, and then talk about maybe some roles for you guys and gals out there if you want to get into the profession. I kind of talked about this the first night I visited, but I have kind of more of a slide that tells about those roles, and then open it up for questions at the end. Unfortunately, can't stick around and go to Mr. Dunderback's tonight. Going to visit. I have a new grandbaby I have to go visit, or I get to go visit, so I'm excited about that. Thank you. All right, so looking back in time, we had this notion of this well-defined castle, if you will, where this is, we have this perimeter, and the moat is kind of like the firewall, and as long as we protect this right here, nobody's getting in. Well, that was never really accurate because you always had wireless, you had removable media, you have email, you have other ways kind of in. But we had ways, it was a well-defined boundary, and we kind of knew what the security challenges were. Ever since like 2000, with the advent of cloud computing, what's cloud computing is just hosting your stuff on somebody else's computers, right? We've had a whole new set of challenges because right now, because now your resources are not in this perimeter, they're out here somewhere, and this is even more exacerbated with work from home, right? From remote work, COVID, everybody's using collaboration tools now. They're using, Zoom and Teams and whatever. There's a lot of mobile and wireless computing. There's a lot of, terminal, remote terminal access. There's also, people don't even realize how much of their business they run on social media. Use LinkedIn for HR and hiring. Use Twitter for help desk support. Use Facebook and Instagram for public relations. But I can guarantee you, in 99% of the time, that doesn't fall under centralized IT visibility and control. And so you have security amateurs running that part of your business. And yet, it's important data on there, right? You're probably collecting personal data, personally identifiable information that you have to safeguard. So that's kind of a shadow IT that escapes people's notice a lot of times. Anyways, we have to kind of go to this idea of a zero trust architecture. It's not just a buzz phrase anymore. There's actually government funding and programs now talking about zero trust. What are the requirements and hallmarks of zero trust? Well, what do I even mean by that? In Jeremy's mind, in my mind, what I say is assume somebody's already in your environment, right? You're already breached, And how are you going to limit what they can get to? How are you going to monitor, kick them out, constrain, contain, and boot them out. If you look at the National Institute of Standards and Technology has the NIST, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework for Critical Infrastructure Protection. This is like a list of 155 controls that they say any organization ought to be doing to protect their data and networks. The first thing on the list is identify, just tell where your important data is, right? Is it on premises? Is it in the cloud? Is it being hosted by software as a service or whatever? Just figure out where it is. And then the second thing, and baseline that, control it. The second thing is, protect it through multi-factor authentication, encryption, all those safeguards you put in place, account management, all that stuff to try to lock it down. But those two only that is comprise about 30 to 35% of the total controls in the NIST CSF. All the rest of them are detect, respond, and recover. Well, that sounds kind of reactive, right? I mean, it's after the fact. You're detecting that somebody's already in your environment, you're kicking them out, and then you're fixing the issues so it can't be an issue again in the future. But that's the new normal. I mean, that's just how it is. So, when the Navy builds ships, they have to be able to go from one place to another, even if they spring a leak. Yeah, they're gonna have to seal off the bulkheads and keep going and get to their destination. It's the same way with our networks. Assume somebody's already inside. I'm going to segment everything so even if they get in here, they're not going to be able to get to my crown jewels. I'm going to add in a single sign-on, multi-factor authentication everywhere. I assume you guys know what that means, where you're using not just user ID and password, you're using, maybe a passwordless system altogether. Something on, something on your phone, biometrics, whatever. And then we want to have endpoint detection and response, agents, and network detection and response everywhere, monitoring everything, so that I can look for these indicators of compromise. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but understanding, you guys are already familiar with Graylog and what that's trying to accomplish, or some of you are. We'll talk more about SIM and XDR and what that is. So yeah, these are all the places where we want to help bring shadow IT under visibility and control. And it's a tricky thing to do, especially when it gets to like operational technology, OT and IoT. That's a particular focus area for my company where we're starting to work on industrial controls, security, and SCADA, which is kind of a overlooked area in a lot of security models. All right, you guys heard about this attack a couple of years ago, right before Christmas in 2020. FireEye, Mandiant, just recently got bought by Google, didn't they? Yeah. They had got hit by something. They knew that there was a remote access Trojan inside their environment. They couldn't figure out how it got there because they're always looking for that stuff. And by the way, they make an intrusion detection system, right? And so it was kind of embarrassing for them. And they're trying to figure out how this happened. And so when they started looking into it, they realized it was the software they used for network health and status monitoring called SolarWinds. It had been backdoored. Their Orion software had been backdoored by a Trojan horse that allowed remote command and control. So they divulged this. They had, I think it was FireEye came in and did the whole forensic investigation and everything, and they came to find out that SolarWinds' DevOps process had been attacked and compromised with some malware called Sunspot. This is super clever malware where they would look for like a running process of Microsoft Visual Studio, and then it would eject a process. It would do things like suppress debug messages and put this code in there where nobody would know it was going in. I mean, it was the level to which they had completely compromised the DevOps process of SolarWinds is incredible. The reason for doing that was, yeah.
I believe, like for the SolarWinds attack specifically, the CEO ended up blaming an intern a little bit after the fact, right, for the weak password on GitHub. How much truth is there to that?
I hadn't even read that. That sounds hilarious. What I was going to say, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I had read early on when the thing hit. I had never read about what the initial vector of attack was. So that's the first I've ever heard that. But it sounds like something a CEO would say. We'll come back to that point in a second. So the purpose of Sunspot, of course, was to drop these droppers, Sunburst, Teardrop, and Raindrop. So Sunburst was a custom command and control Trojan that allowed the Russians or the APT group, whoever it was. When I say APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, that's usually a nation-state-backed hacking group, to establish control. They backdoored this software, and there was 18,000 downloads of it by SolarWinds customers. All right, so this is a widespread attack. This federal government got hit, several agencies. There's at least a dozen security companies besides FireEye that got compromised by this thing. It was very, very widespread and absolutely dangerous. So the thing is, this could happen to any software, right? Like in this case, it was SolarWinds, but what if it was Microsoft Office or Adobe Acrobat, right? I can tell you for a fact, as of 2005-ish, Adobe didn't even have a security group, right? They were developing product, Adobe Acrobat and all that stuff, and they didn't even have a CISO or any kind of dedicated security group. So they do now, but at the time they didn't. So yeah, it was an after the fact. The other ones these other droppers were dropping Cobalt Strike. If you're not familiar with that, it's an exploit framework along the lines of Metasploit, where it allows you to do post-exploitation things and establish remote access and all that stuff. Well, and you might ask, well, how do you drop Cobalt Strike? Can't I just look for that signature, the binary, and block it or whatever? Well, it's a Wares version, right? It's not. It's probably built from custom. It's probably there's leaked source code for Cobalt Strike out there, so they just took that and then built their own custom binaries that would evade detection by a simple signature checker, right? So you'd have to really look for behavior, bad behavior. But this is my question: what was the initial APT to get in access? You're saying some intern on GitHub. Well,
No, it was APT 29, I believe, was who conducted it, right? And I think the original, because I wrote a paper on it for Foundations of Cybersecurity. The initial point of access, I think, was an FTP server secured by weak password that had been on GitHub.
By the way, I have seen this with other companies, even large-scale, multi-billion-dollar IoT companies will have a bunch of 1099 contractors that are using their own accounts to log into GitHub, and then they give them access. They give them access to their whole code base and stuff. So anything can happen, and you don't have that centralized, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication and monitoring, but it happens. So that's a great. I'll have to read your paper, but now I know. Okay, but the bottom line is nobody was monitoring for that stuff, right? You would have seen if you had network surveillance. You would have seen, especially on FTP, you would have seen a plain text password going somewhere, right? When we have SIMSOC capability in place, we can look for that stuff. So my question is, for Maze, ransomware in particular, but also Conti and Revil and some of these other ones, this is based on our own empirical findings. It's also based on working with a group that does ransomware negotiations. What do you think is the most popular initial vector of attack for ransomware? What do you think? That's what you guys think? That's the mantra I hear most of the time, and even on Maze ransomware, they tell you, "Oh, we phished you and got you." It's not actually true. It's actually remote desktop misconfiguration.
You can do it via Zoom and Teams. Yeah, that's the new one that's been picking up because of all the online conferencing and stuff.
Yep, exactly right. So about a year ago, during Super Bowl weekend, this guy at the Oldsmar water supply, water treatment plant, saw the cursor moving on his screen. And an attacker had come in and had changed the sodium hydroxide levels of the water to 100 times normal. They're trying to poison the water supply. I don't know if you read about this or not. It was a TeamViewer attack. So they had TeamViewer with a shared account and a weak password. First of all, there's so many problems there. I don't know why you have an industrial control system control with, not air-gapped from the public internet and allowing remote access without a multi-factor authentication. There's so many ways, but This is most often the way people get access. So they're doing brute force password guessing attacks. They're doing what's called credential stuffing. Anybody know what that is? That's
You just feed it a bunch of usernames.
you find credentials on a breach already, right? A data dump on the dark web or whatever you buy a bunch, and then you just try those. And what happens is people will use the same password on multiple systems. So the same one they used on that system over there, turns out they're using it on this one over here.
What, if I may,
Yep.
so like what's going on in Russia right now, they did an initial attack vector where they had spread the ransomware through warm. So is that kind of like just a classical way where they pair like a ransomware?
That sounds old school.
Yeah.
That sounds like 20 years ago. Yeah. Go look up like Code Red, SadMind, some of these other worms were like that was a big deal 20 years ago. We were able to mostly do away with those because kind of once you got the signature of it, you can block it. But oh, by the way, anybody going to B-Sides?
Pretty much everybody.
Okay, awesome. Did you guys get free entries or whatever? Are you volunteering? Are you do anything? Have a booth?
We're gonna go in as a club, but they didn't tell us that we can get in for free. They gave us a discount.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm giving a talk there along with another guy on Conti ransomware group. So they had, familiar with the Conti leaks, about a month ago after the Russian invasion started, Conti said, if anybody comes against Russia, we're going to attack you on behalf of Russia. And well, they had some Ukrainian members of Conti. I don't think they're too happy about it. And they leaked all their internal communications as well as all their tools. So we've been looking through all those over the last month or so and studying them just to understand, the tools, techniques, and processes of our adversaries. What we came to find out, I don't want to steal my own thunder, but we came to realize that our red teaming approach, our pen testing approach is pretty accurate. I mean, it's dead on of exactly. We use the same methods that Russian ransomware groups use. So when we pen test you, you're going to be basically getting the latest and greatest threat vector. It's nothing. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. This is stuff like putting responder in an environment. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's basically if there's not a specific IP address attached to a machine name or SMB name in Microsoft Windows, you can say that's me, and all the packets will come by your machine. You could grab a copy of all the packets. If they have unsalted hash passwords in there, boom, I can just replay the hash and I can get in. If it has a salted password, I can crack it on my cracking rig, and we will get probably 20-30% of all passwords within, overnight. So it's super easy. All we need is a foothold in the environment. Now, getting the initial foothold, that's the tricky part sometimes, and that's through one of these methods, right? Tricking somebody into clicking on a link in an email, making them download something. It's better to find some missing patch or misconfiguration. Oh, you might find this incredible, but I'd say more than 50% of all systems we test, we still find Windows Server 2003 running, which has been out of support for over 7 years now, right? You can still get an eternal blue patch for it, but that's about it. Anything else we find, we're going to get in. So we always beeline for those deprecated operating systems. So yeah, these are the basic ways. So yeah, remote desktop, and when I'm talking about just port 3389, I'm talking about TeamViewer, ConnectWise, Kaseya. Any of these remote access softwares can be misconfigured, abused. And by the way, I think I mentioned this already, but why are these ransomware groups such a pain? They're really good business people. They realize that because I've seen all these solutions coming out. Oh, here's a solution that will automatically decrypt your files automatically if they've been encrypted because it'll cache a copy of the key. So what? What are they going to do? They're going to dox you and extort you anyway. So yeah, you can get your files back real quick. That's great. From backups or from being able to decrypt the files. But you're still going to have to pay, or they're going to embarrass you, right? And sometimes they'll do things like publicly traded companies. They'll report to the SEC. I've seen it before where they contact all the customers of the company saying, hey, I have all your data because I compromised this company that's your vendor, and they didn't pay the ransom. So now I'm just, And so they're gonna get you one way or another. And then they have these affiliate programs. Like I was saying, they have professional penetration testing teams that they'll pay. They'll go find initial access. Once they have a foothold in there, they'll bring in the ransomware group, and they'll get a part of whatever the ransom is paid. So, and by the way, when they find the initial vector in, they usually fix it so that nobody else can get in, because now that's their system they own. They want to make sure nobody gets in the same way. But they always put a backdoor for later. So the way they do stuff is not, like I say, it's nothing unique. We know how they do it. It's pretty much the same way every time. If you're not familiar with it, the MITT Attack Framework is a study of our adversaries' tools, techniques, and practices. They've documented what these are. Highly encourage you to go look up that website and dig down at each of these steps so you'll understand the mind of the attacker. They're always going to do some initial reconnaissance. They're going to develop resources, maybe a custom tool, script, or method to get in. They're going to execute malware. They're going to try to establish persistence, so backdoor for later, new accounts, things like that. They're going to try to escalate privileges because they want root or admin. They don't want just user. They're going to try to turn off your antivirus, endpoint detection, any kind of tools you use to do analysis on them. They're going to try to scrape passwords. They're going to try to discover what the inside of the environment looks like, move laterally, collect data, stage it for command and control. Command and control, establishing a connection out to Russia or whatever. Exfiltrate all your important data and then shut you down and charge you a Bitcoin ransom. All these things have indicators of compromise associated with them so that if we know what to look for, we can spot them. For example, Maze always drops a startup vrun.bat file in your startup folder. It tries to disable like IDA Pro or any kind of tools you use like that to try to do reverse engineering. For credential access, it drops Mimikatz. If you're not familiar with that tool, super powerful. Basically, every time you log into a Windows system, it caches your password to create like an SMB packet. It caches it in plain text in RAM. So this is a tool that just reads RAM, and now you've got passwords of anybody who's logged onto the system recently, or since the last reboot, actually. So I've gone on servers and gotten passwords of people logged in like 2 years ago, just because it was never rebooted. For lateral movement, they use PSExec and PowerShell. So these are not hacker tools. These are sysinternals tools published by Microsoft that people use for remote command execution over a Windows environment. Any like Windows sysadmins here? Experience? Anybody good with PowerShell? Yeah, these are the tools of the trade here. Yeah, for sysadmins. For command and control, you'll find that there's hard-coded IP addresses in the malware. You just got to know where to look for them. A lot of times they'll try to interleave their traffic, so they disguise it, so it looks like if you're trying to look for bad stuff happening, it'll just look like regular HTTP or HTTPS traffic. For a collection and exfil of important data, you always find copies of RAR or 7-zip. They're staging the data to send it out, and then WinFTP to FTP it out to their cloud environment. For impact, they'll delete your shadow volume. So if anybody ever have a blue screen of death, well, to avoid BSOD, Microsoft made this thing called VSS, Volume Shadow Service. It creates snapshots of your account. So like when you install that Wares program and it caused your whole system to crash, you can revert back to an earlier snapshot of your system before you installed that bad program. Well, unfortunately, they stopped the VSS process, and then they delete all the files, all the VSS files. So then you don't have anything to go back to. And they'll even stop your SQL service so it can encrypt the whole database. So it's but all this stuff we can look for. And we know if it's, as soon as it happens, that something bad's happening. The way we do that is with a SIEM, Security Information Event Management solution, and SOC, Security Operations Center, 24/7. People that try to get by on the cheap and just have 8 to 5, oh good, maybe nothing will happen from 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. the next day, or on the weekends or holidays or sporting events. Yeah, believe me, that's when the attackers know exactly when you're not going to be there, and they're going to step up their game then. You've got to have this eyes on glass 24/7. Okay, so when I say SIM, you guys know this from your RQ class or whatever. We're ingesting logs from your firewalls, your network infrastructure, your endpoint protection, your virtualization, your EDR, your CRM, your cloud, your email, everything into, say, a cloud-based solution, which is then going to run something like 30,000 pre-configured correlation rules. It's going to have an updated threat feed so that there's new signatures being created all the time. For example, Log4j was a recent one, right? As soon as that hit, we were seeing updates for that within a few hours. And a lot of these SIMs will also have some AI machine learning capability. For example, around user behavioral analytics. So, for example, if I log into Office 365 from 8 to 5 every day from Tampa, and all of a sudden it sees me logging in, at 2 in the morning from China, well, that's an anomalous login that has to be investigated. Or they see like an impossible travel situation, so they see me logging in from Orlando and then Seattle within an hour. Unless I'm on the, Concorde or something, I'm not going to get there that fast. So these are things that can be investigated. Yep.
We got a question in chat.
Yep.
So I believe this is Felipe. I was wondering if GeoIP blocking is a method of blocking traffic from outside of, as a method of blocking traffic outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Limit attacks. Is this something that would be beneficial, or is it an easy
Yeah.
way to work around?
Nope. Geopolitical firewalling, I think, is a good idea for some organizations. For example, if you know you're not doing any work, you don't have any business coming in from China or Russia or North Korea, block them. Sure, why not? Can USF do that? No. Why? Because we do have collaborative research we're doing with China, right? We have students from China, and we have professors from China, and we're doing collaborative research with Chinese researchers, so we can't block China, right? So it's trickier for some institutions like educational institutions. But I agree that geopolitical firewalling is a decent solution. Now, attackers can easily get around it by just proxying through some place that you do trust, right? Like if they're coming in from Russia, they're not going to connect from Russia. They're going to connect to some, ISP in the US first, and then use that as staging site to come into your environment, right? So there's ways around it too. Another emerging thing we've been seeing over the last couple of years is SSL VPN as an attack vector. And everybody has one of these. You can find one on Twitter, Marvel. I got these off somebody else's presentation, so I don't actually have the IP address for these. It might be fun to go try this. But how were these discovered? Well, by people such as you, CTF players. Orange Sai and Mechang are Taiwanese CTF players in DEF CON. They also do Pwn to Own, if you guys ever seen that. CanSec West conference every year out in Vancouver. They have a Pwn to Own competition. If you come in and drop a 0-day on, say, Chrome or iOS or whatever, Apple, Google, Microsoft will pay you like a $25,000 bug bounty on the spot. If you can demo that proof of concept right there. And they actually won this year for the most recent CanSec West. They won for an O-Day on Microsoft Exchange server. Well, they said from a bug bounty standpoint, SSL VPN was like a slot machine for them. They were just scored lots of cash. Now, these are ethical hackers, right? They are divulging their security flaws that they find to the vendor, giving them a chance to create a patch before they go public with it. Now, if the price isn't right, maybe you go public anyway. But there is some trickiness to that because, right, I've seen it before where people will divulge a, hold on a second, can't do it right now. People will divulge a vulnerability, and they get blamed, right? Like, why are you hacking me? You hacked me. I've seen it before. Or they'll divulge, a vulnerability, and the people like send them a T-shirt or something. Hey, thanks for that. I'll give you a T-shirt. So, yeah, there's got to be the right compensation. Yeah, go ahead.
I just not patching. Whenever someone
That-
discloses a vulnerability to them,
Yeah.
they don't patch and they don't, give a bounty or whatever.
That's also an issue is that either like they're like, thanks for the info, and then they never deal with it. And so as a researcher, you have to maybe give them some certain amount of time to address it, or else I'm going to go public. Another issue is they'll deal with it, or they'll say, I already knew that, and they'll do a patch for it, and then you still don't get paid. I mean, there's a lot of, it's fraught with difficulty being a bug bounty researcher.
I heard this in a talk, I think it was GMC, a guy had figured out how to enable like remote unlocking and remote start. And he told them for about 6 months, and they said, oh, thank you, we'll take care of it. Still nothing, and eventually they just refused to do anything about it, and he released it. And then they were like, why would you do this? What?
This is so dangerous to the public
Yeah,
safety.
yeah, what
Yeah.
motivated you
Right.
to do this?
Don't shoot the messenger.
Well, with these guys, they try to do it the right way, and they've written a lot of CVEs on these things, and SSL VPN, FortiGate SSL VPN is found on nearly 500,000 servers out there. So this is a widespread issue. Here's what they did. They treated it like a CTF challenge, honest to goodness. When reading a write-up of this, initially they have this firewall image, which is just a big binary blob. Well, how do you mount that thing? They actually patched it in memory, and able to get a mount point where they could log in to the shell. And then they went exploring it, just like any kind of Linux distribution. And then once they found the places, you'll never believe what the actual exploit was. It was a format string exploit, which is old school. I mean, we've known how to protect against that for 20 years. The issue is most web VPN implementations are based off a 20-year-old distribution of Apache. So whether it's a Palo Alto firewall, FortiGate, Pulse Secure, whatever, Cisco ASA, if you're trying to provide remote access, instead of buying a proper implementation, you try to write one in-house, you take some old Apache code, hack it up, and that becomes your SSL VPN. Well, it's not good. They also showed that most implementations they found have native script language extensions. Now you're really running into trouble from a format string standpoint. They also found path normalization bugs, which means they could do traversal attacks. Basically, by typing ///// a million slashes, they could get out of the protected area and into like the password file. So the bottom line is they found ridiculous stuff in there. The SSL VPN was just like Log4j had these logging issues. The SSL VPN in old Apache had some logging issues where it was logging the user ID and password in plain text of everybody who ever logged in. So we did find this in the wild. Like a year and a half ago, we got called in on doing a forensics job for an auto parts company that had an e-commerce website, and they got hacked, and they were ransomed. And so we came in and tried to do a rebuild, recover. It was not one of our managed services customers, I can tell you that. Knock on wood, we've had a pretty good track record where nobody we've ever been watching has ever had a serious breach resulting in a financial loss. So, I don't want to put a target on our back or anything, but having said that, we got called in by a third party, I think a lawyer or somebody, to come help with this company. When we got there, we're trying to segment them off and rebuild their systems, and we kept finding new domain admin accounts created. We're like, how is this? Because we had completely rebuilt the system and completely reinstalled it from scratch. Well, we came to find out their firewall firmware had not been updated for a year. So these patches, a lot of times, even when the patch comes out, it takes people 6 to 9 months to install it, especially on firewalls. So a lot of people will hit Windows patches, even desktop application patches right away, and they forget about stuff like printers, virtualization software, remote access software, and firewalls. Okay, so that has to be part of your patching and vulnerability management program. All right, so when we figured out they were getting in through the firewall, then we were able to plug that hole, update the firewall, and finally we got rid of the attacker, but it took so long. Oh, when they finally were able to show how they landed this, they had to use a heap overflow, which means they just sent a specially crafted string to the web server, and they were able to bypass the user ID password login and get right to the binary. These guys are great. You can see all the CVEs they wrote, and every one of those essentially turned into money for them. Another area that might keep you awake at night if you're a security professional is ubiquitous wireless and this idea of 5G. So if you don't know the Gs, if you always see that on your phone but didn't know really what it meant, 1G was no data. It's just voice back in the 80s. And then 2G, GSM, and CDMA were technologies supporting up to 40 kilobits per second throughput. Still not a lot. 3G, now we're starting to get some serious data movement. 4G, yeah. 5G, now we're almost like home wireless, right? 20 gigs per second. That's the thought. That's for stationary systems. Obviously, if you're moving, it's a little bit different because you have cell handoffs and all that stuff. But a stationary system theoretically could get up to 20 bits per second, 20 gigabits per second throughput. How about the amount of data being processed worldwide? 38 exabytes, that's a 10 with, I believe, 18 zeros. By the end of 2019, we're going to be up to 160 exabytes per month by 2025. But fortunately, 5G is designed to scale. I'm not a double E or anything, but here's, as far as I understand it, the three flavors of 5G. You've got the millimeter wave, which is very short, but allows for high burst data transfers from short environments. So I know Amalie Arena, we've done some work with the Lightning in Amalie, and I know AT&T came in and installed millimeter wave pico cells all over that place. So there's 15,000 people sitting there watching a game. They're all texting videos of the game with no lag, no degradation performance. Pfft, everybody all at once. It's so nice. Midband in the 2.5 to 3.5 gigahertz range is the most widely deployed. That's what you're going to see cell towers. Yep.
Didn't the FAA just recently come out with a big statement about millimeter wave sort of transponders and how they mess with kind of aircraft air-to-ground radio?
Yeah, they're worrisome. If you were using one on a plane, I guess it would be super worrisome, and it has to do with their proximity to
It's
the aircraft.
Radar altimeter is what
Yep.
it messes with when it's on the ground.
That's something else to worry about.
Because the bubbles are so close. to what they see.
And then the low band kind is the low, lower power, long frequency. Not great for a lot of throughput, but good for rural areas where you could maybe, allow long distance transfers. I think this is the one that people get nervous about from a health standpoint because we don't know what the long-term deleterious health effects are, and this is why you have people out in England smashing towers down and stuff. I don't want to do 5G towers; they're going to kill me. Cancer making. For me, this is what I worry about. The risks inherent to 5G technology itself. So, back in 2G, this is years ago. I went to DEF CON and somebody gave a talk, and they brought their own cell tower with them. And whoever, back then you would always connect to the strongest signal. So everybody in the audience connected to this guy's GSM tower, and he was able to tell your phone that the only encryption method I can support is plain text. So your phone was like, okay. And he got everybody's SIM card, MZ. He got their credentials, and he had, basically any, unencrypted communications with everybody in the entire audience. That was eye opener, crazy, right? And by the way, the encryption they were using back then was super weak. It was like, less than DES, and the integrity checks were weak and all that stuff. Fast forward to 3G, they started putting in authentication not only from the SIM card to the base station, but also from the base station to the SIM card. So two-way authentication. They started upping the encryption, so that now we're using like AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, 128-bit encryption. Second thing, that worries me is increased data transfers, proliferation of poorly secured devices. So a few years ago, anybody hear about the what was the attack? The hosting company, the ISP. I forget what it's called now. Not Akamai. Can't think of it now. It was some ISP. They got bought by somebody else. I think they got bought by Oracle. But long and short is they hosted like eBay, Twitter, Amazon, and some other sites. And they got taken down for like a day and a half, almost 2 days, with a denial of service attack. And what they had done is brought in, besides a botnet army of PCs, they also brought in like 100,000 Chinese webcams, right, to attack. Dyn, D-Y-N, look that up, the Dyn attack. That was the first time we realized that really, the proliferation of poorly configured IoT devices and broadband communications equals bad news for networks, okay? And then I guess the third thing we worry about is, Huawei backdooring all their gear. There's certain third world countries that their entire infrastructure is built on Chinese, hold on one second, gear, and we have this fear that it's all backdoored so they can eavesdrop on everything, and it's also they have the capability to kill switch it, and just pull the plug on the whole telecom system whenever they want. Question?
I was gonna ask about that Huawei. They were in the news a few years ago, and
Yeah.
there's not a lot of their products that are being sold anymore.
Right. So in the U.S., we've passed federal ordinances and laws and executive orders about we can't use that stuff in our government systems or in our critical infrastructure. So AT&T and Sprint and all these people are not using Huawei backhaul for a reason, for a good reason. The good news is 5G protocol itself looks to be pretty strong. They now allow for network slicing, which is along the lines of microsegmentation, as we mentioned earlier, allowing you to set up slices of wireless segment to compartmentalize resources. Awesome. That moves us towards zero trust. Their signal encryption and integrity replay protection are much stronger now to guard against eavesdropping and tampering. And they have secure identity management now to provide measures for authentication. So on paper, it looks good. The question is everybody implementing it the way it's written down in the actual backhaul? I don't know. I hope they are. I hope they're doing it the right way. Running out of time, but on to the next topic. AI, machine learning. You guys know what this is. Anybody? When I was here as a student, 20 plus years ago, I took a class I took an intro to AI class, and I took an expert systems class. You ever heard of expert systems anymore? I think they're called, I don't know what we call them these days. I think I don't know. But I had, back then, USF was heavy into fuzzy logic and not as much into neural networks. I don't know about how it is nowadays. But anyways, what we're trying to do is make computers mimic human understanding and capability around understanding problems and solving problems, and then combining these things to do things like self-driving cars, diagnosing cancer, and so forth. Well, when it comes to AI and cybersecurity, where do we stand on that? Well, the hype of vendors is, oh, you've got to have our AI product because people are attacking you with AI, right? They're going to use AI to find the weaknesses in your environment. But the reality is, I don't think we've really actually seen that. This is not to say it couldn't happen. There could be advanced nation-state APT attacks from China, Russia, that do that, but I don't know of any that are currently in the wild that we've divulged as such. But it could be coming. So here's what I think. Again, DEF CON from about 5 years ago. They had something, it was sponsored by DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It was called the Cyber Grand Challenge. They wanted to have autonomous systems, these bots up here on the stage, did attack and defend against each other. It was a capture the flag, and a completely automated, the world's first automated capture the flag. So they had these classic problems like Heartbleed and Pedia, not Pedia, or whatever. I don't know, it might have been before that. But they took some of these classic problems from that we've seen, Code Red, and these worms, and they put those out there to attack all these systems, and the systems had to be able to detect that they were vulnerable and fix themselves, self-heal. Conversely, they needed to go figure out that vulnerability in other systems and automatically exploit it and get flags to score points. So the winner was Mayhem from Carnegie Mellon, as you might imagine. Plaid Parliament opponent guys, right? Also put together the best bot. And it won the whole competition. They had it go up against human CTF competitors that weekend at DEF CON, and it finished dead last. It did get on the board. It got on the board early on. It's able to, its number crunching ability. It was able to find some low-hanging fruit and get, some flags. But for the most part, anything that required human ingenuity, creativity, complex problem solving, it couldn't do, and ended up getting trounced. But it was a great entry because back in the day, I'm sure, Kaspersky. I'm not Kaspersky. What's his name? The world chess champ probably didn't think any computer could, beat him. But now we have chess programs that can't be beaten by humans, right? So, Deep Blue or yeah. Here's my thoughts on AI. If you read a book called Tribe of Hackers, and by the way, that's a free download. You can go on there. It's a great book that Marcus Carey and Jennifer Lynn, they've been B-side speakers here before at Tampa, but they put it together where they interviewed people and said, just tell me your story. How did you get to be a hacker? What makes you, what's your philosophy of life and all this stuff. And if you read through there, about half these people all say the same thing. Good security comes from good security people, not a shiny box that does stuff. This is never truer than, there's a local company that we provide services for now. When we first came in there, they had bought their own SIM and had installed it, but they didn't really have anybody watching it. So they're paying like $50,000, $60,000 a year for the software. And I'm like, can I log into your console? And they're like, yeah. And there were 90,000 unattended alerts in the console. So it was making noise, it was doing something, but nobody was looking at those alerts or doing anything with them. The way I feel about AI is it's great, it's shiny, it's new, it's something, it's wow, it's cool. And I already told you one of the areas where it would be super effective is in user behavior analytics, and specifically knowing when people are logging into certain applications from certain locations at certain times, right? That's great stuff, learning like that. But I still think you need people to make sense of those alerts and follow up on them and study, look at the outliers and the anomalies and all that stuff. There's also some thought about automated playbooks or remediation. Like if I see something happening, I'm gonna do these things in this sequence. That's a good way, surely, to brick your system, break it. I would never trust automated remediation, but maybe in the future. Was there a question over here?
Kind of, yes. It was relating to one of the classes in my last semester talked about AI, but more so it talked about attacking through quantum computing, or being able to pretty much make attacks obsolete through the use of emerging uses of quantum computing.
So, all right, 3 years ago, I gave a talk at B-Sides on post-quantum cryptography and how quantum computing could mean the end of public key crypto as we know it. That's still a threat within the next 10 years. The idea being that public key cryptography is based on discrete logarithm problem or factoring of numbers, right? Right now, that's very difficult for computers to do for large numbers. But what if you could offload this into a dimension in which time is not a factor? Okay, quantum computing, right? Yeah, it blows your mind to think about it, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're able to solve extremely difficult problems like that in a negligible amount of time because you're doing it at a place where the rules of time and physics break down. Okay, so that's the idea there. And so yeah, we're going to have to come up with some new methods for protecting against those type of attacks, or else we already know China is trying to force all internet traffic to go past its main gateways so they can snapshot everything. So they have a copy of everything that's ever traversed the internet. And then sometime in the future, when they're able to come up with a quantum computer that can decrypt anything, now they're going to be able to decrypt every email that's ever been sent, every message or communication that's ever been sent. Now that's dangerous, right? Financials, private stuff, secrets, all that. Question?
Is you say something like that, and to me that brings up the storage problem. Is that really something that can be, that amount of traffic?
Storage is cheap. They can, there's enough storage for that.
And then just becomes a private
We-
key-only world, or what happens then?
Future state would be, and what does that do to blockchain too, which is all based on public key crypto? We're going to have to come up with, if you look up post-quantum cryptography methods, there's something called matrix or lattice cryptography that we're looking at now as a means to have a robust solution. What the idea is there is you have stages where even if they offload one stage into a dimension where time is not a factor, they still have to assemble all the things at the end, and so that takes time, and there's ways to put barriers in there. So you make it slower. You just make it slower. You can slow the whole thing down to make sure they can't do that. You can look at I have a YouTube. I mean, actually, the YouTube talk's a little bit disappointing from B-Sides because I ran out of time. So all I did was get through quantum computing, which is important too, before I actually got to quantum cryptography, which was supposed to be the whole point of the talk, but that happens sometimes. Like tonight, running out of time. So having said all this, if you find yourself in a cybersecurity role at a company, this is what you've got to have in place. You've got to do, must do. Have a plan, assess your security posture, establish continuous monitoring, and train people. So like diving in a little bit deeper here, you've got to have a formalized program of cybersecurity, which starts with executive leadership. Frankly, they're going to pay the bills, right? If they're not bought into the thing, it's not going to happen. It can't be a grassroots effort of your IT department. That's just not going to happen. So it has to start at the top. Then you have to have kind of a roadmap with milestones, resources. You need to assess yourself against a best practices framework, right? And have a regular program of vulnerability assessment, acceptable use, instant response, business continuity, disaster recovery. You've got to have some plans in place, and you got to test those plans. Going back to the whole quantum physics thing, they say Schrödinger's equation of backups, the state of a backup is unknown until a restore is attempted. That's never true. I've seen that so true. Oh man, I thought we were backing up to the cloud. Nope. Turned out that somebody turned that off, and we were backing up locally, and so now your main database is encrypted and your backups are encrypted. Whoops. Yeah. So. You've got to assess where you are using both technical means, vulnerability scanners, and tools like that, but also an assessment against a best practices framework such as the Center for Internet Security Top 18 controls or NIST CSF, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, whatever your industry or government regulation says you should be doing. And then, like I said, you're going to come up with a gap. You're going to say, okay, here's the stuff we have in place. Here's the gaps. Here's the stuff we need to fix. And then burn down that list until you reach a state of compliance. Continuous monitoring, as we said, super important. This is really the most important thing for security, in my opinion. You can have policies in place. You can have training. You can have an annual pen test. None of that can tell you right now, today, if an intruder is in your network. This is the only thing that can do it. So the people that are doing the internship, whatever, the learning how to use Graylog, the security operations, that is so important. You wouldn't believe how many organizations don't have that, don't have the basic visibility. Couldn't tell you today if an attacker's in their system, not in their system, because nobody's looking. You got to have that 24/7 monitoring. Literally can turn a $750,000 incident into a $75 incident. And I know a local company, I won't tell you who, manufacturing production, they make a specific product. They were shut down for several weeks, couldn't ship product, couldn't receive payments. Their entire financial system was encrypted, going back for 2 years. So they didn't even know, they had no books. They had no accounting books for 2 years. They ended up having to pay the ransom. So we had to, that's absolutely the last choice for us, right? Facilitating a ransom payment. But that turned out to be something like $550,000. The attackers initially wanted a $1.2 million. We were able to talk them down to $550,000. But then on top of that, you had all the remediation, rebuild, restore, recover. That was a $750,000 incident for these guys. And it's not a big company. It almost put them out of business. And then last thing is, cybersecurity awareness for employees. So videos, quizzes, all the stuff like you do in school, but also I think you need to fish them regularly. And some people disagree with this, but I think this really empowers people. It keeps them on their toes. We just did, oh my gosh, we did a really good phishing exercise for a customer recently, last week, and we got 40% of the people to click on our thing. And so, yeah, usually we get 25 to 30% initially, and through training and continuous reinforcement, we can get that down to 2 to 3%. Notice I didn't say eliminate, but at least lessen. All right, if you guys are going into the field, here's the stuff that we have as jobs, and these are companies out there are hiring. There's a 4 million person worldwide shortage of cybersecurity talent right now. State of Florida, 38% of the state jobs in cybersecurity are unfilled right now because they don't pay enough, frankly. But yeah, these are the issues. We don't have enough people to do these jobs. So number one is what I was talking about, security operations. These are the blue team. These are the defenders. These are the people running vulnerability scans, people running SIMSOC monitoring, advanced threat hunting, and forensics. So these are ongoing level of effort tasks, such as security administration, security training, things like that. I consider these all to be operations. Security engineering is kind of on the offensive cyber side, also known as red teamers. They'll do penetration testing, both external and internal, as well as web application pen testing, maybe even mobile app pen testing. They also develop customized tools for automation and threat hunting, and they're going to do like your one-off projects. So, for example, a lot of customers have no idea where. Remember, the very first thing you have to do is identify your important data and where it is. They don't even know how to do this. Think about it. Let's just go like Moffitt Cancer Center, across the street. They probably have, 10,000 staff? I don't know how many they have. They have a lot, several thousand staff. They probably have tons and tons of data shares, file shares, collaboration tools, email. There's probably 1 million places, databases and all that stuff, where patient info could be stored. Like they know if it's in the database, they can kind of know it's there and control it. But what about staged data that hasn't been uploaded to the database yet? Or what about reports that are generated out of the database and are sitting on somebody's desktop? What about an email with a social security number that's sent from this person to this person? What about a patient record? What about a treatment plan, that's on their other system? So you can imagine a company like that has got personally identifiable information and sensitive data everywhere. So DLP is the idea that you're going to discover where the sensitive data is, and how you do that is kind of tricky, right? If I just went in often and started looking for 9-digit numbers to find all the social security numbers, I'd also find all the zip +4 numbers. So that would be like, I'd have a lot of noise. You have to do kind of contextual and relational mapping to find this stuff. What about stuff that's been scanned on the Xerox and stored as a PDF? Now you have to do OCR recognition to figure out that there's personally identifiable data in that document that's stored in this file system over here. So it's very, very tricky. There's not that many good tools out there for discovering sensitive data. And then you have to tag it. You have to label it. So you're probably going to manipulate its metadata, like the comments or the part of the file that's last accessed, last created, accessed, etc. You're probably going to manipulate that and put some kind of label in there, tag. Then you have to keep it from just traversing out the environment. Like you're going to have some kind of firewall that's going to check the tag and stop that data from going out. So as you can imagine, that's just an example of like a one-off project that you're going to have some engineering task force is going to have to implement. The third area is GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. These are the people that understand the regulatory mandates, the industry and regulatory mandates and requirements. They're going to assess you against these requirements, and they're going to help point out that the places where you're weak and need improvement, and need to help you come up with a plan to address all that. These people are super important because, like I said, unless the management gets involved, you don't get paid. You don't get the money to fix stuff. If you hire me, I come in and do a pen test and show you all these flaws, and then I come back the next year, you hire me again, and I find all the same stuff there because you didn't fix it, and I ask you, the usual reason is we didn't get any budget. Well, why are you asking me to come back and pen test you again then? Because you're just going to lose again. You're just going to get owned. This actually happened in one year where this insurance company, I'm like, I'm just going to try the same credentials I tried last year. Not kidding. Domain admin credentials. And they worked. So I'm like, test over. Pay me. But so the bottom line is you have to show some reporting, dashboarding for management to show that you're accomplishing the goals, that you're meeting a plan, and you're progressing and maturing the organization forward. Question?
Yeah. So we got Felipe saying, do our cybersecurity methods change when HIPAA or other sensitive information is involved?
That's a great question. So the cybersecurity methods, I would say, don't change too much, other than the fact that what we were talking about before, for HIPAA, you're going to have operational technology, IoT systems involved, like MRI scanners and things like that. You're going to have patient healthcare systems that are probably different than other types of information systems. But for the most part, at the bits and bytes level, it's all the same: data storage, networking, things like that. The compliance mandates are going to be a little bit different because those have a lot to do with the privacy of the data and how you protect the, how do you collect the data, how do you protect it, how do you make sure it doesn't get transferred onto third parties without permission, how do you make sure the integrity is good for the data. So there's more privacy considerations that I would say are different for healthcare than there are for maybe banking or some others. They're trying to, have anybody heard of FERPA? That's about educational data, like with you guys. They don't want, for example, once you become a student at the university, strictly speaking, your parents can't really see your record anymore, right? Unless you want them to. You have to give them access because that's kind of a federal law now that says, your educational record is private data, just like your healthcare record is. So it's a good question. The methods, the compliance methods are different. Are the security methods different? I would say only different in that the information systems that are used to process the data are different than most. And finally, some of the stuff I talked about today, I've actually blogged about on our website, so you can go. I'll provide this PowerPoint. Yeah. The SolarWinds breach, SLVPN, remote desktop, talks about all this stuff. All right, I'll do 5 minutes if you guys have any other questions. Yes, sir.
So what kind of attack vectors do you either think are the most prevalent, most damaging, or are something that in the future is going to become more popular?
Yeah, I mean, right now, as I said, remote desktop is huge, and we saw this just recently. So we deployed a SIEM for a company, and this is a value add of us versus maybe some other company that just tells you what the SIEM says. Like there's managed services and then there's managed services. You know what I'm talking about? Somebody might say, I've deployed a SIEM for you. I'm looking at the SIEMs and I'm creating an escalation when there's something happening. But that's just regurgitating what the SIEM says. I think our team adds value by actually diving deeper. For example, we deployed this SIEM for a customer. We immediately saw a brute force password guessing attack on a box. So the SIEM alert is brute force password guessing attack. When we started looking into it, we found out port 3389 was open, remote desktop. Okay, it wasn't whitelisted, so they allowed connections from anywhere. It was coming in from Russia. And they didn't have any limit on the number of connection attempts, or they didn't lock out the system out. So they were trying multiple password tries without getting locked out. So that's where we have to come in and ask the deeper dive questions. Why isn't this behind a firewall? Why aren't you whitelisting it? Why aren't you requiring multi-factor authentication? Right? There's all kinds of things they could do to fix that problem. And that's something the SIEM will tell you also. SIEM will show you these indicators of compromise, but then the engineering team has to go fix the things so they don't be, they're not a problem anymore. But I think that remote access is still going to be an issue because it's so easy to do. So still, there's so many misconfigurations out there, misconfigurations. The other thing we've seen a lot of 0 days of mail servers still. Have no idea why you want to run your own mail server when you can go host it on Office 365 online. Not that much money. I think I would highly recommend letting Microsoft manage that for you. Because if you run your own mail server, like last year alone, we saw bunches of 0 days for those. So if you don't keep the thing patched all the time, the reason people still run their own mail server is a lot of times backwards compatibility with some legacy software they have in their system, their environment. Like their accounting software has to send out messages, and they haven't figured out how to make a data connector through Azure to do that on O365, so they keep their old Exchange server on premises, and then it gets hacked, and then they use that as a place to pivot into the whole environment. So the other place we always see, as I mentioned before, deprecated operating systems that can't be patched. Windows 7, Windows Server 2003, even Server 2008. They're out of support anymore, and so you can't patch them. And so that's where I'm going to beeline first if I'm pen testing you. Question?
Yeah, so you guys obviously have a red team or a
Yeah.
testing team. What's you guys' opinion on like adversary emulation programs like Caldera with MITT? Or I don't know if you've heard of that.
So you're saying,
Software that emulates red team.
that's interesting. I'd still rather have humans do it. I mean, I guess you could. I've seen simulated ransomware attacks before that will go through the steps and raise the IOCs just kind of to test out your detection capability. I have seen that. That's pretty cool. But I'm not familiar with that one in particular. That sounds kind of neat, though.
It usually has like an operator behind it. Like, okay, so now we're going to test this, and then they run the chain.
It does sound a little bit like exploit frameworks too, like a Cobalt Strike too. Here's what I would say. When we do our red teaming, we'll specifically try to be covert, stealthy, and unannounced, and do things quietly. We're not just going to get in and start running a vulnerability scanner, for example. We're not going to give ourselves away like that. Unless, like, we're at the end of the test and they haven't ever stopped us, and haven't ever detected anything, then we're going to like make some noise and see, hey, are you guys even watching, right? Then we might run some scans. We might do. It sounds to me like stuff along those lines could be picked up if you had a detection capability where you knew to look for some scripted sequence of steps. Just look for that, that sequence, and then raise an alert. Last question. Anybody? In the back?
Yeah, so PASS is outside your company's domain of operation, but my question is, it seems like when it comes to cyber engineering, how to break into it, the advice is usually pretty clear. It's learn Python, bro, or it's like just pen test boxes. And then for cyber operations, it would be like learn this tool,
The SIM.
practice analytical skills. But for GRC, how to break into it, it's not that clear cut. So
Okay. That's pretty easy. Just go read the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, become an expert on it.
That's kind of the end of expecting, but
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, if you came into an interview and you were able to be conversant about, detect, protect, respond, or, I'm sorry, identify, geez, I can't even get it myself. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and try to speak to those, showing that you understand how a framework works and how the controls work, I would be impressed as an interviewer, I think. If you came in having, looking for a junior GRC analyst job and didn't even know what the best practices frameworks were, I'd be like, yeah, go away. We brought in, like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but we brought in somebody from St. Leo's program who had gone through their information assurance program and supposedly knew frameworks, and this person didn't even know like what a firewall was, honestly. So, no hurt, no offense against St. Leo's, but not all programs are the same. I would guess, you're going to get a better education here at USF through the Cybersecurity BS program. I really don't know though. Since I'm not teaching actively right now, I can't say how good the instructors are, the curriculum. I hope it's good. Was a pleasure seeing everybody in person. Thank you. I'll see you on April 23rd at B-Sides. Come. Yeah, I'm giving the Connie Leaks talk along with Mike Mallon, one of our engineers. We also have our CISO is going to be on the CISO panel That would be worth your while. I think that's like 1 o'clock is good. There's going to be a chief information security officers who are actively doing their job. You're talking about GRC. These are the people that really know GRC, right? They know what it takes to implement a program in an operational environment and how to get budget and funding for it and make sure it's successful. They can also tell you about the pitfalls, discovered with that stuff. So I think B-side is going to be a lot of fun. That's right here at USF, right? It's right at the business school? Okay. All right. See you then. And I'll come back sometime. I'll think of something else to talk about. Cheers.